Back in the heady days of the early 2000s, if you were looking for a practical and spacious family car, chances are you would be looking at an MPV. They came in various shapes and sizes. You could have a small car-based MPV, a larger car-based MPV, a van-based MPV, and they were just as popular as SUVs are nowadays. 20 years later, in a world full of SUVs, does the mid-2000s MPV still have a place? And if it does, which expression makes most sense? Which is nicer? Which is better? The van-based MPV or the car-based MPV? Well, in this video, I'm going to have a little comparison of both of these. This is the Fiat Doblo, which is a van-based one, and this is the Citroën Xsara Picasso, a car-based one. Let's get to it. Both of these cars are front-wheel drive, 5-seater vehicles. Both of them are powered by diesel engines. Both of them are capable of being extremely good and reliable family workhorses. But is that where the similarity ends? Does the fact that one is actually based on a van change the nature of what that vehicle's like? Does it make it arguably more or arguably less desirable? But are we putting image here before practicality? And should we be looking a little bit further under the skin? Let's dive into the Doblo first. This particular example is the high roof version, which means that it has extra headroom inside. And I would have to say that the styling is really not for everybody. There's a hint of Popemobile or a hint of Postman Pat about it. But there can be no doubt that the tall roofline and the boxy shape must give you a huge amount of space inside, and that is of course what an MPV is all about. So let's take a look inside. I really like the circular door handles on the Doblo. They're a real echo of the Strada. But anyway, let's open the driver's door and have a look inside. That reveals quite a huge door, which opens with a lot of body-coloured metal on the inside and a slightly funky design door card that's got the pull handle kind of joins the two halves of it together. It's quite cool. There's a door pocket, there's I think a cup holder, a little bit of an armrest, and quite a simple kind of locking device there in the handle. The seats are trimmed in this really quite attractive funky fabric in this nice shade of mid-blue, which really lifts the cabin and gives it sort of a sense of fun and joy, I think. Stepping on board then, let's have a quick look at the fascia and dashboard of the Doblo. The dash is quite high up. On the passenger side to start with, we've got an airbag there, we've got a little shelf there for storage, and we've got a glove compartment there. There's a speaker built into the dashboard over there, and we've got these funky kind of round pod air vents, which are quite nice. They're in quite a number of other cars as well from that kind of mid-2000s period. We've got a very large steering wheel that is not particularly elegant, I have to say. It's got quite a rough feel to the edge because it's quite worn, and it's quite large and bulbous. The instrument cluster is quite simply laid out with the speedo on the left, rev counter on the right, fuel and temperature gauges. One of the things I've noticed when driving this car, by the way, that really annoys me is that the speedometer hasn't got 30 or 50 or 70 marked properly. So you really have to guess where you are for those speed limits, which I think is really irritating. In the middle of the dashboard, we've got a radio up high. This is an aftermarket one. Then we've got controls for the fog lights, front and rear. We've got the electric windows for the passenger side and the driver's side, and the hazard warning light. Now, I do think this is a terrible piece of design, I have to say, because the other night I was driving this and tried to put the window up and activated the hazard lights accidentally because I hit just away from the switch, which is quite annoying. Heated rear window and a blank for something. Then we've got some heater controls here. That's the fan. It does have air conditioning that pulls out. Heat, cold or hot, distribution of the heat, and recirculation stuff. Looking further down, we've got a 12-volt socket, we've got a hole where another one could be, we've got a 5-speed manual gearbox mounted up on the dashboard to give us kind of more space here on the floor. And then turning to the floor, it gives us another cup holder that sort of moves forwards and backwards, a coin holder because it is a mid-noughties car and for some reason coin holders were still exciting, a very large handbrake, and we do also have an armrest, which is very useful, very comfortable on longer journeys, but it does get in the way of gear changes, I find. The rear of the Doblo, though, is what this car is all about, so let's have a look in there. Now, as you can see, the Doblo has a sliding rear door, which is very different from the Picasso. And it opens up to reveal quite a spacious passenger compartment in the rear there, with what looks like bags and bags of legroom. We've got 3 seats. They're not individual. These two here are attached to each other. There's the one in the middle is a little bit smaller, and then there's a separate one on the end, which means that we can fold those 2 seats down together to make more space. These seats also tip forwards like that, and there is a handle here that you lift up, and then the whole thing can kind of tip forwards. You can remove the seats, but it does require some tools to undo those little brackets there, and then they would lift out the car completely. Having sit in the back of the Doblo, well, I've got masses and masses and masses of headroom. I've never been in a car that's got so much headroom, but then this is the tall version. There's also a huge amount of light. It's really, really light and bright in here and airy. It's great. And also, because the rear seats are quite elevated, you actually sit higher than the people in front of you. So you have a fantastic view out, which, yeah, is a great place to be as a passenger. There's also absolutely acres of legroom. However, apart from the party trick of sliding doors, there isn't actually very much equipment in the back here at all other than a door pocket. And we have some sliding windows in the door as well. It's that noise of the door closing that really reminds you that you're in a van. Let's go around the back and have a look at the luggage capacity of the Doblo. And we have a rather gigantic storage area there with a parcel shelf that can flip over just like that. One of the reasons the Doblo is still very popular today is that people do like converting them into campers, especially these high roof versions, because there's such a huge amount of space inside. Of course, it's not a transit van, but it's a lot smaller than a transit van and therefore easier to drive. One of the things that does mean the Doblo is left behind in the modern world is that it doesn't have ISOFIX points on the rear seats, which means that if you did want to carry young children, well, you basically couldn't. The Xsara Picasso, then, is a very different beast. From the blocky van style, we are suddenly into this very swoopy rugby ball shape. For me, it's a shape I absolutely hated when it first came out, but it's grown on me over the years, I have to say, as I found it quite a clever piece of design. There's actually a really interesting history to the design of the Picasso, which is well worth looking up. It involves design competitions and court cases of the different prototypes. And when you do see the prototype, you do mourn the fact that not all of its design cues made production. It would have been a lot more fun if it did. The design language of the Xsara Picasso is very much Citroën of the early 2000s. It's very rounded, very monobox. It's got the teardrop-shaped headlights, for example, that the C5 and the C3 also had. And being a classic MPV shape, it does perhaps give you a bit of an image problem because I think they are deeply unfashionable at the moment. And arguably, although the Doblo is much less attractive than the Picasso, it is perhaps arguably cooler because of the fact that it has that reputation of a bit more of a go anywhere, do anything funky utilitarian vehicle, rather than sort of cheap family transport for people who love to go to McDonald's drive-thrus, which is the reputation that Xsara Picassos sadly are tarnished by. However, let's give it its chance and have a look inside. We have a much more conventional door handle here that we pull to reveal, in this example, quite a clicky door, and a full door card that's trimmed in some, again, funky 2000s fabric and lots of grey hard plastic, but it is kind of textured with this sort of elephant hide texture that everybody loves. We've got a door pocket that does have some decent amount of space, simple door pull, speaker and a door handle. The seats are also trimmed in this kind of velour fabric that has got this very funky purple, blue and green 2000s pattern to it, which is really rather attractive. Stepping inside the Picasso then, into the driver's seat, we have got a very, very large dashboard that stretches out for miles in front of you, with a central binnacle for the instrument cluster. Down from that we've got a centre console which has got the heating controls, some very conventional looking air vents, a radio that's inbuilt rather than a aftermarket type that could fit into the Doblo, and the display screen comes up on the centre display there. So it's kind of linked, it's a Picasso radio. Electric window controls are down here on the centre console. I don't like them down there, I prefer them on the door, they're easy to find, but at least they're not next to the hazard warning light switch like they are in the Doblo. We've got, again, a 5-speed gearbox that's mounted up high on the dashboard. It's quite a funky new design in that time to have it up there. It was very unusual. which means you have a really completely clear and flat floor, so I can sort of move my leg around, which is quite good. And you can actually stand and kind of go through into the back of the car through the little gap in the seats if you really wanted to. Over on the driver's view then, we've got quite a decent looking steering wheel. It's quite sculpted, and it's got sort of finger grips on the back of it. We've also got some steering wheel controls with volume and tuning and that kind of thing for the radio, which is quite cool and means you don't have to take your hands off the steering wheel to organise the radio. We've got 2 stalks. Again, we've got wipers over there, and we've got indicators and lights on the left hand side, and also the horn at the end. I've just turned the car on so you can have a quick look at the digital display. So it's really quite straightforward. Some warning lights on the top, temperature gauge, fuel gauge, speedometer, and then we've got an information centre that tells you your economy and that kind of thing. There's no rev counter on a Picasso. Storage is really where the Picasso wins out, because we've got these little kind of tray bits here on the dash. Then we've got a largish glove box which also has cup holders built into it, which just about clear the dash on top of it, so it's not completely pointless like other ones I've seen in other cars. There's also a little cubby down here and an ashtray. The rest of the Picasso storage tricks are at the back, so let's go and have a look there. These rear doors are of the conventional type, not sliding, but they are big, wide and tall, which allow you huge amount of access into the back, which is great for passengers who are less mobile. It's also, of course, higher up, the same as the Doblo, which I didn't mention earlier. The rear door cards are the same story as the front, but we do have a keep fit window. I promised you clever storage, and I shall deliver. Underneath the floor mats there is a little box, there we go, which opens up to reveal a little storage area for your atlases, etc., and there's one on the other side as well. We also have a tray table, which is really very funky, which has got an inbuilt cup holder. And we have 3 individual seats, each of which has a 3-point seat belt and an adjustable for height headrest. The plus side of having 3 individual seats is that the middle person can't really complain because they are just as wide there as the outer 2 people. However, the outer 2 people do sit very close to the edge of the car, and you do feel a touch squashed. And the cleverness of the Picasso doesn't end there, because if I unhook the seat belt from that little hooky thing there, we can first of all take the seat belt and hook it onto the clip there on the pillar so that it doesn't fly away. Then, if I lift that lever, I can fold the rear seat flat forwards, and then if I lift the little lever at the back, it simply tips completely forwards, and I can also unhook them from the car by just flicking that little lever back and lifting it out of the car in one simple movement. And then that gives you a completely flat load area, and you can obviously leave 1 or 2 or 3 seats in place, however many you want, depending on what you're carrying. The boot of the Picasso opens much more conventionally than the Doblo and is essentially a hatchback. As you can see from the sticker, it opens to 2 levels. So there's this level here, which is sort of just above head height, and then you can push it a tiny bit further and it goes even higher. I'm not entirely sure why, but I'm guessing it's so it doesn't bang against the roof of a car park, that kind of thing. The boot is deep and wide and can store an awful lot of stuff, but of course it definitely is smaller than the Doblo. The parcel shelves are a touch more sophisticated than the Doblo as well, because it goes up with the boot and sort of clears out of the way. In a Picasso as well, you do get this really funky little storage box. It sort of pops out and becomes a little trolley. It's great fun, and when you don't need it, it tucks away in the side, like so. There's also a little cubby hole here that reveals some oil and other bits and pieces. Again, because it's an older car, we don't have ISOFIX points in the front or rear, so if you are carrying young children, it isn't perhaps the vehicle for you. So it's clear that both of these cars are achingly practical in their own particular ways, but that they both also have a bit of an image problem, again in their particular ways. So I think it's time for me to take both of these cars out for a drive and see whether that separates one from the other. Okay, so on the road in the Picasso to start with then, and well, what's it like to drive? Well, the driving ambience is very much like a sort of a starship or a shuttlecraft on Star Trek The Next Generation or something like that. You have this massive expanse of dashboard in front of you that gives you this fantastic illusion of a huge amount of space in the cabin. It really does, without it feeling so van-like. So immediately you have the smaller driving mirrors, and the driving position is much more car-like than in the Doblo. The pedals are where you would expect them to be in a car. They're more comfortable in your ankles. The steering wheel is also at a slightly nicer angle, so it's a bit closer to you. Doesn't feel like you're driving a bus or a van. This particular Xsara Picasso has a 2-litre HDI with a 90 horsepower engine, so it's about 13 horsepower down on the Doblo, and it certainly feels quite slow. It gets there, but it's very, it's almost as if it's fighting against you whilst getting there. It's not a very free revving engine compared to the JTD and the Doblo. I wonder whether that might have something to do with the fact that this car has 509,000 miles on it, but we'll gloss over that, shall we? The visibility is really, really good, so you can see around, quite clearly, but it's by no means sporting, this car, in any way. It's softer than the Doblo, which is not unexpected, because obviously the Doblo has got much chunkier suspension for that kind of van base that it has. So yeah, this is a lot softer, so it's a lot more supple and compliant around the bends, but yet it still has really rather excellent road holding, which you wouldn't expect from something that's done 500,000 miles. I have to say, it really does kind of grip, and it's quite entertaining to drive. If only it had a slightly chunkier, powerful engine to kind of bring you up with a bit more joy, but it does the job really, really well. And I've done quite a few long journeys in this car, and it's actually really comfortable. I never come out of it feeling tired. I come out of it feeling perfectly comfortable and refreshed. You know, the seats are good, pedal position is good. It's quite a relaxing car to drive as well, because it's not the sort of car that makes you want to kind of zip up through the gears and get up to 70 miles an hour, which actually the Doblo does. The Doblo really does kind of encourage you to thrash it a little bit, because it kind of enjoys it. Whereas this one doesn't really. It just kind of lollops about, gets you up to speed, gets you to where you want to go with the minimum of fuss, and it sort of makes it not exciting and fun, but at the same time extremely competent and comfortable. The central speedometer, digital speedometer, takes a little while to get used to it, but now I've been kind of flitting about between this and other cars. I actually almost immediately get used to it. It's a little strange when you're turning the lights on at night though, because the dashboard's already lit up, and so when you turn the key on you don't really realise that your lights aren't on, and when you turn the lights on actually it dims, because obviously it's in a brighter mode for daytime driving. When you turn the lights on it dims a little bit so that you don't kind of dazzle yourself with the brightness of the display. Quite a nice touch, but it does mean you can't have the lights on during the day very easily if it's a bright day. And these days I do quite like to run with my lights on during the day, because everyone else's cars have their lights on during the day, so I kind of feel like I'm standing out and as not as visible. So without further ado, let's jump into the Doblo and see what that's like. Well then, turning to the Doblo, what's that like on the open road? Well, not quite an open road here, it's very much a city road, but it's surprisingly easy to drive. Yes, it feels very much like a van. You have a slightly van-like driving position. The steering wheel's a little bit too far away. The pedals are set in quite a kind of horizontal sort of position, a bit like a van. And you have the big van-like mirrors. But it doesn't feel big. It feels really very easy to place on the road. The mirrors are actually excellent, so you really can place the car looking behind you on the white lines and that kind of thing. And it really doesn't feel excessively large at all. And that's because it's not. It is, not really any bigger than an ordinary car, and it's just tall. And the tall driving position, speaking of which, really does give you that really commanding view that you get in an SUV, or an MPV of course. But even in this heavy traffic here, it really feels nimble, it feels light, the controls are really all to hand, the gear change is pretty good. It's a little bit vague, like the travel's quite far between the gears, but it's very, very easy to drive, surprisingly so. The other thing to say about it is that it is actually incredibly powerful. I mean, I'm currently stuck in some stationary traffic, so that's kind of hard to believe. But when the road conditions actually allow it, it is really quite nippy. The accelerator pedal is incredibly light, and so just the slightest touch of it really gets the engine kind of revving away. The other thing to say about it is that it's incredibly refined, and I wouldn't have expected that from what is essentially a van. It's actually at 70 miles an hour really reasonably quiet, and I would have thought with the high roof that would add to the wind noise, but it really doesn't. It's incredibly good at higher speeds. I'm really quite impressed by this car, or van, or whatever you want to call it. I suppose the downside of the Doblo is that you really do still feel like you're driving something quite utilitarian and essentially a van. You're quite aware of it at all times. You know, the driving position, the fact that the windscreen is raked at quite a sharp angle, the big mirrors, the body coloured metal inside, the kind of very plasticky centre console, that kind of thing. It does feel very utilitarian, like a van. And I suppose it could not be a criticism. It really depends on what your mood is, whether you're looking for something that is more like a car with the kind of more refinements of a car, slightly plusher fabric, nicer feeling material, or whether you just don't care one iota about that and you just want something that is unfailingly practical. And I suppose that is ultimately my conclusion of this review. Both cars are really very, very good in their own rights. They're very impressive. For two cars that I had essentially ignored, and a market sector, or two market sectors that I had essentially ignored for a very long time, I'm really impressed with the space, the refinement, and the clever touches that both of these cars bring to their owners' lives. So if you're looking for a practical family car, you do not care about getting a PCP deal, you don't care about having the latest Land Rover with the highest spec gadgets, etc., then perhaps a mid-2000s MPV or a van-based car like this is what you actually need. They're cheap to buy, incredibly cheap to run, very efficient, very good, easy on a long journey, carries all your stuff, all your people that you could possibly desire carrying. And really, if you're not bothered about image, both these cars are absolutely fantastic family buys. So there you go, that is my conclusion on this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Do please subscribe if you haven't already done so. My analytics on YouTube suggest that like 90% of people who watch my videos have not subscribed, so if a few more of you did so, I'd be extremely grateful, not only because it boosts my ego, but a higher number of subscribers means that YouTube kind of prioritizes your videos in their algorithms a little bit more, and so the kind of my videos then get a slightly wider reach, which means that more people can enjoy the stupid, really ridiculous cars that I occasionally drive. So there we go. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.